Hello, and welcome to today's ACM SIGSOFT webinar. This webcast is part of ACM SIGSOFT's commitment to provide value to its current and future members. The ACM SIGSOFT webinar series features speakers from the International Conference on Software Engineering, as well as select keynote speakers and distinguished paper authors. I am Will Tracz, Lockheed Martin Fellow Emeritus, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today. Before we get started, for those of you joining us for the first time, I'd like to quickly mention a few housekeeping items shown on the slide in front of you. First, the slides will advance automatically throughout the event. On the bottom panel, you will find a number of additional widgets and resources. If you are experiencing problems with the slides or audio, press F5 on your Windows or Command-R on the Mac and refresh your browser on your device. You can also just relaunch the presentation. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A box at any time and click the submit button. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time to respond to as many questions as we can. This session is being recorded and will be archived. You will receive an automatic email notification when it becomes available. With that said, today's presentation is Making the Heart of Agile Concrete Essence by Paul McMahon. Paul is Principal Consultant at TEM Systems, where he has been coaching large and small teams in practical approaches to increase agility for the last 20 years. Prior to his independent coaching, Paul spent 25 years working as a software development in the U.S. defense industry. Paul recently released his fifth book, It's All Upside Down, What I Learned About Software Development and Why It Seems Opposite to Everything I Was Taught. With that said, Paul, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Will. First, I would like to thank Will Tracz for moderating this session. And I'd like to thank Alistair Coburn, one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto, and Ivar Jakobsen, the primary visionary behind the creation of the Essence Framework, for encouraging me to put this presentation together. So just let me start with a little background. I originally gave a version of this presentation at the Heart of Agile conference in Pittsburgh in April of this year. The Heart of Agile conference was created by Alistair Coburn because he was concerned that key goals of the Agile Manifesto had gotten lost over the last 17 years, and he wanted to bring focus back to those goals. Alistair's belief is that the true heart of Agile can be captured in just 4 words: collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve. In this presentation, I want to share the key points I presented at the conference in Pittsburgh, but I also want to supplement that presentation by sharing with you some of the interesting questions I received and how I answered them. So let's get into it. So I think a lot of people connect with the goals of the Heart of Agile. I'm going to start by sharing with you why I connect with those goals by explaining a problem I have observed many times in my many years of working in the software industry. I will then explain why I believe we're facing this problem, and this will lead to an idea I want to share on how we can solve the problem. At the end, I will share a number of practical techniques you can start using today, either as a coach or a team member, to strengthen your own team's implementation of the Heart of Agile, and that is regardless of your particular approach to Agile. So let me start with a little background on the problem. In 2001, 17 years ago, Agile began with a simple manifesto that could be captured on 2 simple pages. And people understood it. They got it. It resonated. Otherwise, Agile wouldn't have become so popular. But now let's look at where we're at today. We now have multiple competing implementations of Agile. And if you go online, you can find hundreds of pages about each. Now, I don't want you to get me wrong on this. I'm not saying there isn't useful information in this material. It came about because people had questions about how to implement the various aspects of Agile. And so the authors responded by developing their material. But what I am going to do in this presentation is challenge how they responded, because I believe there is a much simpler way that can save us all an enormous amount of time and frustration. So let's look at where we are today. First, it's an undeniable fact that new frameworks and methods are going to continue to be developed. Continuous improvement is a must. But this also means that our software professionals, many of who are burning the midnight oil trying to get software delivered on aggressive timelines, they need to have enough time to keep current on these new approaches, so they are ready to help their companies or their projects with improvement decisions. But this leads to a question. Is reading the types of heavyweight material we now have the most effective way to learn the discriminating features of each of these approaches? And I intentionally use that phrase, discriminating features, and you'll understand why in the next few slides. It's also a fact that more and more companies are realizing there isn't one true way to develop software. This means there isn't one perfect method or framework for your situation. In fact, if you go online and Google kill all methods, you will learn why Ivar Jakobsen thinks all canned methods are hurting organizations today. And that's from someone known as the father of RUP, or the Rational Unified Process, one of the most famous canned methods of all time. As a result, more and more companies today are building their own way of working from a mix of practices, methods, and frameworks. But this leads to a few more questions. How are these companies making these decisions? And how do they know that the decisions they're making are best for their projects or organizations? So from my own personal consulting experience, when I have looked close at the tailoring going on in numerous organizations, I find many are making their people do redundant or excessive work, such as requiring status or documentation in multiple formats, while others are adopting a single approach, such as Scrum, thinking that is all they need, when in fact they have serious technical gaps. And by the way, for those listening who might not know it, Scrum, while it's very popular, doesn't help with technical issues such as architecture or design. So that's just one example. Now, I want to look at today's software competency challenge. And the reason I want to do this is because this is critical to your understanding the problem I'm going to describe. Alistair Coburn often refers to a kaido from the martial arts and its 3 levels of learning or practice. Shu is the initial stage where the student just wants the master to tell them one way. Ha is the stage where the student breaks from the master, recognizing that the one way breaks down in certain situations. Re is the stage where the student has become a master, and he doesn't even need to think about process anymore because they just know what needs to be done and they know how to do it. Now, the fact is, most software practitioners are only beginners for a short time in their career. The Ha stage is where most practitioners spend most of their time in their career, and this is where they need most of the help. I would also add here that if most of your people are in the Re stage, you don't even need to be listening to me right now because your people just know what to do. You know, and this is an example where I can say something about what happened in Pittsburgh when I gave this. At this point, I actually asked. I stopped and I asked for a show of hands as to how many people believed most of their people were in the re-stage. And as I looked around, I didn't find one hand raised, and that's what I expected. So keep that in mind as we go forward. I'm going to refer back to this. So where is the heart of the problem implementing the true heart of Agile? This is where I felt my presentation was going to get or could get controversial, and I told those in attendance this fact. So I suggest that by the way, I would mention Alistair Coburn was in the audience, so he was listening intently. I suggest that the 4 words, collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve, are insufficient given the competency of most practitioners. And the important part of this assertion is that fact about the competency of most people. So we're going to come back to that. So I also submit that and this slide is very important, and it may be a little difficult to follow, but we're going to come back to it. So I'm going to go slow here over the next few slides. I would also submit that the way we're trying to help today isn't working well, and that's because it is incredibly difficult to identify the real gems or discriminators in each competing Agile implementation, and then figure out how to extract those gems and then insert them into your own way of working to address a specific problem you know you have. And the reason this is difficult is because each implementation comes packaged with an incredible amount of common information that is not a discriminator. But each author seems compelled to explain this information with their own twist, trying to make their version of this common information a discriminator. And they actually do the reverse of what they're trying to do, because they end up masking the true discriminators of their approach. Now, if you're having some trouble, you're having some struggling, you're difficulty understanding what I'm saying, let me explain this in a different way, a more direct way. Have you ever picked up a book or gone to a website on a supposedly new software approach, and you get about 50 pages into the book, or maybe you've spent an hour or two on the website, and then you stop and you think to yourself, what the heck is new here? I'm telling you, this has happened to me over and over in my software career, and I've been doing this a long time. It is frustrating, and I know I'm not alone, because when I say this to colleagues, it resonates. And at the conference in Pittsburgh, I could also see heads out there going up and down in the audience, as it was clearly resonating with many of the people as I expected. And I'm expecting that I've got people out here today that it's resonating with as well. So I now want to suggest that the reason we're facing this problem is because something fundamental is missing. And that something belongs between the Heart of Agile and all these competing implementations. That something is that common information that each author explains with their own twist today. If we could all just agree that there is a segment of the body of knowledge of software engineering that fits in this middle ground and doesn't dictate any specific way of doing Agile, and this is a very important part of the point, and I'm going to talk more about this, so I want to say this again. Something that doesn't dictate any specific way of doing Agile, then if we could just agree that that exists, then practitioners could learn this information just once, and authors could then develop much leaner material focusing just on the real discriminators. And this could save us all an enormous amount of time, and it would be more effective. Identifying and packaging this common information is what Essence is about. And for those of you who haven't heard of Essence, Essence is a new OMG standard. OMG stands for the Object Management Group. The standard was just established in 2014. The standard, it resulted from the CMAT initiative. CMAT stands for Software Engineering Method and Theory. This initiative included volunteers from around the world, including industry, academia, and research, and its roots go back to Ivar Jacobson International's work with their S-Work product. And at the end of this presentation, by the way, I should mention this now, you'll find a list of references, and I'm pretty certain you can get access to the slides. And in those references, you can learn more about CMAT and Essence. So what I now want to do, this presentation is kind of broken into like 4 parts. And so we've gotten through the first part where I described the problem. What I now want to do is give you a quick tutorial focusing on what makes Essence common and different, and how it's different from all those other competing implementations of Agile. And I'm going to do that quick, and then we're going to get into how to use it a bit. But I want to take just about a 10-second break here to get some water. I'll be back in 10 seconds.
Okay, and this is the moderator, Will Tracz, saying, please submit your questions. I'm having a little technical difficulty since my internet decided to go down in the middle of the presentation, but please submit your questions, and I'm sure we'll get around to answering them at the end. Thank you.
Okay, so Essence was developed with a vision to create a framework that students and practitioners could take with them for a lifetime, including only the things that never change or change very slowly. That's important to keep in mind. That's the vision behind it. Therefore, it contains no practices. It works with whatever practices a team is already using or might decide to use in the foreseeable future. Essence is different from past frameworks in multiple ways. First, it's referred to as a thinking framework. You don't hear that about other frameworks. In fact, I had a friend who was an electrical engineer by education and a program manager. I asked him to take a look at Essence and tell me what he thought. And he came back and said, you know, this Essence thing gives you a lot of context with respect to problem solving. And I loved it when he said that, because that was exactly what we were trying to do, help practitioners solve their own problems. Another way it is different, I like to say that Essence is the first framework that I know of that works with any practices and was developed for practitioners to solve their own problems. Now, some people come back to me and say, isn't Scrum for practitioners, and doesn't it help solve problems? And I answer that by saying, yes, but here's the difference. Scrum is a set of practices. Essence contains no practices. Essence, on the other hand, focuses on goals. And by focusing on goals, it can help teams with Scrum or any other approach they're using. I'm going to give you multiple concrete examples of what I mean by Essence focusing on goals shortly. But at this point, I'd just like to add that today Essence is making its way into Scrum. IJI, or Ivar Jacobson's company, has partnered with Scrum Incorporated, Jeff Sutherland's company, and Jeff's one of the founders of Scrum, and he's using Essence in his Scrum training. And I will shortly give you examples in just a few slides on how I'm using Essence in my own Scrum training. Now let's dig a little deeper. Essence contains 7 alphas. Often people respond when they first hear this with, well, what's an alpha and why the new term? So first, you're going to see very few new terms in Essence. But we decided we needed a new term here because something new is going on. Alphas are the essential things we work with. In the past, with many of the frameworks, we got into trouble when people confused the essential things we work with documents or evidence of the important thing. Alphas always exist, and they have checklists. Now, some might come back and say, so what if they always exist? Or how's that going to help me? And others will say, well, people have been using checklists for years. How are the Essence checklists any different? I'm going to answer both of those questions in the next few slides, but now I want to look a little closer at Essence. So I like to start when explaining the model by saying one way to use the alphas, like the dashboard in your car, they're indicators of progress and health. So let's start in the upper right corner of this diagram. There are always stakeholders. Stakeholders are the people, groups, or organizations that affect or are affected by a software system. There is always a software system. A software system is a system made up of software, hardware, and data that derives its primary value by the execution of the software. I'm now giving you the formal OMG definitions. There's always an opportunity. Some people confuse opportunity with requirements. Opportunity is a situation or a need. It's a set of circumstances that makes it appropriate to develop or modify a software system. If no one has a need for a new or modified system, no one's going to fund it, and you'll never get a team together to build it. There's always requirements. Requirements is what the software system must do to meet the stakeholder needs and address the opportunity. There's always a team. A team is the people actively engaged in the development, maintenance, delivery, or support of a software system. And the team always has a way of working. Now, we were careful not to say method when building the model. Many people think of a method as a documented method, but all teams have a way of working, whether it's documented or not. The way of working is the way a team gets its work done, and there's always work. Work is effort, physical or mental, done in order to achieve a purpose. Now, if I just stopped there, you'd probably say, so what? So what? These things always exist. How's that going to help me? So now what we want to do is look a little deeper with concrete examples of what's underneath these alphas, because that is where you can begin to see the real value of the framework. So let's start with the 4 words from the Heart of Agile: collaborate, deliver, reflect, and improve. With respect to those words, Alistair Coburn has said it's just that simple. But he also said it's still difficult to do. And the reason I believe it is difficult to do is because people in the Haas stage will have questions about just what these words mean. So this leads to another question. How do we communicate to our less experienced people what our experienced people know about the meaning of these words? So let's start with the word collaborate. When I think of the word collaborate, I first think of stakeholders. And I ask, are all the key stakeholder groups identified and represented? And are the representatives authorized, and have they agreed to the collaboration approach? And are they actively involved, providing timely feedback to the team and communicating with the group they represent? And I also think of the fact that collaboration extends to the team and its developers as well. And this means if one of your teammates lacks experience, needs a little help, it is your responsibility to help where you can. This means the team is working as one unit. And when you break the word down this way, which is what you need to do to really understand it, you start to learn what collaborate really means. And you start to see the deeper value of the Essence checklist, because hopefully what you're seeing is from the checklists that I've X'd, I'm explaining, my understanding of the word. Also note that you're learning from these checklists the goals of a sprint review rather, without being told to conduct a specific practice called a sprint review. And that you're going to see throughout all these checklists. No practices, but you're getting at the goals. That's a very important point of what we did with these checklists, goal-oriented. Now, what I want to do now is give you a true story on how to effectively collaborate. This is a story from my Neuro case study in my latest book. I had given the Neuro team Scrum training, and in that training, I used Essence to teach the goals of each Scrum practice. During an early sprint, the team discovered that a key stakeholder couldn't make it to a sprint review. They immediately realized a key goal was in jeopardy, and so they quickly brainstormed how to solve this issue, and it resulted in the product owner getting on a plane and taking a demonstration of the product to the stakeholder. Now, the point is they knew the goal was not just to hold a meeting or conduct a practice called a sprint review. And they knew that the goal, which I impressed upon them when we did the training, they knew that the goal was to involve key stakeholders and get their feedback, which is why they decided it was important for the product owner to take the demo to the stakeholder site. So what I hope you all can see here is the significant difference between conducting a practice and meeting a goal. The goal the team learned from the Essence training, those goals never change, or they change slowly. Another way to say this is that the Essence checklists deal with real outcomes, not documents or activities done. Now let's look at the word deliver. When I think of the word deliver, and again, I'm going to talk now to the particular checklists that I've X'd there. So when I think of the word deliver, I first think of architecture. And I ask, do we have a sound architecture that will support not just the current delivery, but subsequent deliveries as well? And I think of risks and critical interfaces that can also affect the success of future deliveries as well as the current delivery. I think of functional and performance testing. And I think of defects, all of which can affect the success of a delivery. And I think of user documentation and support documentation and whether it's adequate to support the delivery. And again, we see here the examples show that by breaking the word down this way, which is what you need to do to understand what it means, you learn what the word deliver really means, and you see more examples of the deeper value of the Essence checklists. And I hope you're seeing from these examples how Essence checklists, by focusing on goals, can provide a middle ground between the 4 words of the Heart of Agile and all those competing heavyweight implementations of Agile, focusing on specific practices. So now let me give you a true story. Let's see here. Yeah, now let me give you, I didn't have the slide up there. Now let me give you a true story on effective delivery. A colleague of mine who had returned to the university to teach after spending 20 years in industry told me that what attracted him to Essence was the fact that he saw how Essence could help with a problem he had seen in industry. He said, too many developers think they're good software modelers because they can draw a picture using a tool. He went on to say that he thought Essence could help with engineering thinking. And if you go back and look at those checklists related to Software System Alpha, you'll find many of them focus on proven aspects of good design that are true regardless of chosen tool or technique. Again, these are examples of things practitioners can take with them for a lifetime. I'd also like to point out here that there's an effort underway to simplify Essence even further for engineering in general. So let me take another quick water break, and I'll be back in another 10 seconds.
Okay, Paul, and the audience out there, there's several people wondering where the slides are, and normally they're listed in the resource list, but I see that our production manager failed to include those. So I asked you, if you're interested, just to come back tomorrow and launch the presentation and click on the resource list button, and there will be a link to the slides which you can then download for your use. Thank you.
Okay. So now let's look at the keyword reflect. This reminds me of a study that was done a few years ago at Carnegie Mellon West, where a group of students were asked to use Essence in reflection meetings. After the study, the students were interviewed, and one said, Essence helped us think about things that could be problems, but we didn't know could be problems. This response gets at another key value of Essence, risk. Carnegie Mellon has reported that 60 to 80% of the cost of software is in rework. Rework results from decisions made with inadequate information. Inadequate information implies risk. Therefore, anything you can do to reduce risk has the potential to reduce software development costs by 60 to 80%. Now let's look at the keyword improve. Once the team understands their problems from their reflecting, they need to agree on what to improve. This leads back to a question I raised earlier related to how the team knows their improvements are really improvements and aren't just adding redundancy or inefficiency or deleting something essential. So by examining your proposed improvements through a common reference point, such as Essence, a team can gain added assurance their improvements are real improvements and not just redundant or not deleting something essential, which is common when teams get stressed, such as coders who just get focused on getting their code to work and stop collaborating, which often leads to more rework later, which, by the way, I would also add here that this was the reason the Neuro team in my Neuro case study hired me, because they had this exact type of a problem. So now I told you this presentation is broken into different pieces. I'm going to now switch, and I want to talk to you. I want to explain a number of practical techniques your team can start using today with Essence to strengthen their implementation of the Heart of Agile. And first, I want to explain how I personally use Essence as a coach with clients today in what I call stealth mode. And your internal coaches or your project team members could start using Essence today in your own organization this same way. So this is an example from a conversation I had with one of my clients who started by explaining a problem they were experiencing. And if you refer to bubble 1 on the slide, the client explains that they have two key stakeholders that use their system differently. So immediately in my head, I start thinking about the stakeholder alpha and the software system alpha. You can refer to bubble 2 there. The client then continues to explain the problem, as you can see in bubble 3. And they explain it by telling me that when they make changes for one customer, they too often break critical functionality for another. This leads me, as you can see in bubble 4, to go deeper into Essence in my head, thinking about key checklists in the software system alpha, system functionality tested, and defect levels acceptable. So from here, the conversation continues as I raise questions about testing practices and defect practices, and this helps us drill down until we locate the root cause of the problem. Now, What I want you to get from this is that my client doesn't even know I'm using essence in my head to guide the conversation and lead to an effective solution. And this is why I call it stealth mode. What I want you to take away from this example is the fact that essence is packaged and worded to support natural conversation, leading teams to find their own effective solutions by drilling down and locating root causes of issues and then brainstorming effective solutions. This is a great technique for coaches to help teams without telling them how to solve their problems. And when teams discover the solution for themselves, it's much more powerful because they own it, and they're better equipped to solve their own problems in the future. And this, by the way, this is what coaches should really be doing. I've often said that my goal as a coach is to work myself out of my job as fast as possible. A coach is successful when the team doesn't need him or her anymore. We should not be trying to keep the team dependent on us as coaches. We should be teaching them how to solve their own problems in the future. This is also a great example that shows why we refer to essence as a thinking framework or a problem-solving framework. I'd also like to add here that one of the first questions I received when I did this in Pittsburgh was about the size of essence. And I answered this question by stating that the essence of essence can be captured on a card deck of 41 cards. But being a little more precise, there are 6 alpha state cards for 6 of the alphas and 5 for the other one, the team alpha. On average, each alpha state has about 6 checklists, which means on those 41 cards, there are roughly 250 checklists. So I'd also add here that I don't recommend coaches try to keep all 250 checklists in their head at the same time. I don't do this. What I do is before I start a coaching engagement, I always do a little homework to understand the background information on the client. This kind of gives me a good idea of where the primary issues are and where we're going to be focusing in on. This allows me to then focus on a subset of the alpha checklist. So in practice, I would usually have narrowed this down, the checklist to certain areas which I might be keeping 25 or 30 in my head to guide the conversation. So that's, again, kind of the way I use this in what I call stealth mode. Now let me give you another example showing how a practitioner can use essence today to help a teammate with a common situation. And this example is an estimating example. In this situation, what you see on the slide, one teammate, John, is asking his teammate, Mary, why her estimate for a task is much larger than his. In this case, Mary reminds John that he needs to make sure he remembers to add in his rework time, the time to fix his bugs that he usually installs. Notice the checklist reminder on the essence card with respect to rework. This is a simple example of how an essence checklist can act as a reminder of something we have known for 50 years. That is, bugs and rework always happen, and the time that it takes to fix them needs to be part of an estimate. Now, please note that I'm only giving you one simple example here of a checklist related to estimation. Estimation is something that every software professional needs to know. In fact, an old graybeard mentor of mine, when I was first starting as a programmer in 1973, gave me some advice. And he said, learn the things that never change. And I'll never forget this guy. It seems like yesterday, more than 50 years ago now. And he told me one of those things is estimating. If you learn how to create a good estimate, it is a skill you can take with you for a lifetime. And if you want to learn more about how to become a good estimator for a lifetime, I talk more about this 5 specific essence checklist that I focus on, and I've written a blog on those 5 specific ones. We don't have time to go into them all here now, unless you ask me some questions later on it. But the reference to my blog about estimation is at the end of the presentation. Now, I also want to mention here that this is an area I got a challenge question from one of the people when I gave the presentation in Pittsburgh. And that person said that he works with teams that don't estimate, but they still get their product out. And I thought this was a really good point, because I know it's true that because I've worked with companies that where teams don't explicitly estimate, but they're still successful at delivering their products, and they have happy customers. And I can even point to two of these examples. Software developers at Facebook and Google, they get their products out, and they don't have an explicit estimating practice that they use. At least most of them don't. But here's the point I want to make. This gets back to the earlier point I made about the skill level of your people. Whenever I've seen teams that succeed without explicit estimating, I've found it's due to the high competency of the people. And they're actually, many of them are operating close to that restage. I actually believe that they actually are estimating, but they're kind of doing it unconsciously or tacitly in their head based on their own previous experience, which is, again, the way people at the level work. And they just know how to estimate because they have the experience, and they know how to factor in all the attributes just naturally, the things to think about. So this gets back to the point I made previously, that these checklists are focused on helping practitioners in the high stage who have questions because they don't know how the experienced people do the work. And this, again, is where most people are in the high stage. This is also a good place to point out another important attribute of Essence checklists, and that's the fact that every team doesn't need to give equal weight and attention to every checklist. Each team should consider each checklist and decide based on their own situation if there are issues they need to attend to or not, given their own context. And again, this is another example of using the framework as a thinking framework. I don't want people to start to use this like a set of dictated practices. This is not about rule following. These are not practices that are in essence. And I think this is a very important point for people to take away on this. I also want to point out, and this is another important point, I want to point out that Essence isn't saying anything about a specific practice or technique such as planning poker. But when you conduct the planning poker practice, team members are asked to make an estimate of story points and then show their estimate. But they're not given any more help with respect to what to think about when they make that estimate. So I hope what you're getting from this is another example of how Essence goes deeper, helping people learn things they can take with them for a lifetime about estimating without telling them to do a specific practice such as planning poker. Now, some of you might be thinking, do I really need all these fundamental, simple reminders? And the answer is yes, for a couple of reasons. First, because as crazy as this may sound, in most computer science curriculums today in the universities, we don't teach our students fundamental engineering thinking and problem-solving skills. This is one of the reasons we currently have a project underway with university professors around the world to develop a textbook and supporting material to help professors teach Essence to our next generation software professionals. By the way, one of the things we're learning from interacting with those professors that the best way to teach software engineering is by setting up teams and giving the students projects where they build real software and have to deal with real situations as they will have to do this when they go into industry. So this is one of the best ways for students to learn the value of Essence, which is what the Carnegie Mellon case did. And I'd also add here that you don't want to set up what I'll call like perfect projects. They need to really learn how to handle the difficult situations. And a second reason you need these fundamentals is even for people who do possess good engineering thinking and good problem-solving skills, we know human beings are notorious for forgetting fundamentals, especially when we're stressed in our job and being pushed to deliver to aggressive schedules. Because, what do we do in those common situations? They're pressure-filled. We forget those fundamentals of what a good delivery requires. Or we start to forget what it means to effectively collaborate with a key stakeholder, including our teammates. In other words, we fail to recall all the pieces of collaboration or delivery that we know from breaking the word down, as we discussed earlier. These are common ways that most software projects get into trouble. So let me just make a few final points before I turn this back over to Will. First, essence checklists are not magical or new. But what is new is the way essence is packaged with natural language and its focus on outcomes or goals that never change or change very slowly. And I hope if you take anything away from it, it is that point. In the future, as practice and method framework authors get on board the essence approach and package their new approaches recognizing essence, which, by the way, packaging practices recognizing essence is called essentialization, and that process is a whole other topic, could be a whole other webinar. But as practitioners, when we get there, practitioners will save an incredible amount of time in assessing and understanding the true discriminators of new approaches. But this is the great reason for practice and method authors to use essence. It's an opportunity for them to really make their discriminators of their new approach stand out. And it will help end the frustration we all feel when we think we're about to learn something new, and it turns out to be the same thing we learned over and over, but now just with another twist. But what I want you to take away here is that while this is a huge future benefit of essence, you don't have to wait for the practice and framework authors to get on board for you to start benefiting from essence. You can use essence today as a coach or a teammate using the techniques, such as the concrete examples I provided, to help your team learn proven engineering thinking and problem-solving skills that were true 50 years ago and will still be true 50 years from now. And by doing this, you will help your teams implement the true Heart of Agile, regardless of your choice of Agile implementation approach. So with this, I'm going to turn it back over to Will to see what other questions may have come in. And hopefully I'm pretty close to my 45 minutes. So back to you, Will.
Thank you, Paul. And you might want to advance to the next chart, because there are two questions that I'll combine. Is how can I introduce my engineering manager to Essence? Are there any beginner-friendly references? And the second question on the same topic is there an idea of what the Essence textbook might be called? I'm teaching one of these team project-based courses.
Boy, so the references, we've got the answer right here on this slide. And the new textbook, which we've already built the draft. We've been working on this for almost 2 years. And I'm working with Ivar Jakobsen. I'm a co-author. Ivar is one of the lead authors. We are right in the steps with our publisher right now of coming up with the final decisions on a title. I believe, we wrote a book before called The Essence of Software Engineering, but the new textbook is going to be something like Software Engineering Essentialized. That, I believe, will be the topic. But, of course, the publisher may want to tweak that a bit. But Software Engineering Essentialized. And as I mentioned, we've been working with professors around the world now. We have a project going, and we've got them. They've gotten early drafts. And the book in a draft form has actually been used in some universities, a pre-version of it, for us to help get feedback. And we've had some very positive feedback from Pekka Abramson, who's one of the professors in Norway, who's used the book with some of his students. And we've got a number of other professors who are planning to be using it this September. Again, a draft version. We're hoping to get the book actually out by the end of the year.
Thank you. And along those same lines, you may have answers. What's the most approachable way to start the journey of understanding and practicing essence? Is the OMG spec good enough?
So the best thing I suggest is from some of these references, there have been numerous papers written. If you go to my website, and I have it here, I've written a lot of articles on it. I actually have talked about Essence in my last 2 books that I wrote. But picking up some of the articles is the least expensive and the best way to get introduced to it. And look at some of the case studies. I think to start using it is this approach that I gave you a few simple examples on, using it in stealth mode and using it as a thinking tool along with whatever you're doing. Any practitioners can do that now because it's independent of the practices you're using. It helps you think through the problems you're using on a daily basis. So go look at some, if you look at my website, you'll find a lot of blogs I've done over the last couple of years on patterns and how to use patterns with Essence to help you think through a problem. So that's the best way to get started using it, because you don't need to change anything you're doing in your organization. It just helps you think through problems, find solutions, root causes, and helps your team implement whatever you're doing currently in a better way.
Thank you. Now, there's a question regarding the blogs, and you have 2 blog links that I see on your references. Could you differentiate, set expectations, what people might find at those 2 sites?
So on the 2 that I've included, you will find more details. There's one blog on the reference to estimation. So if you're interested more in what I talked about with regard to how to become a good estimator for life, I actually refer to a presentation that I watched Judy Bamberger give many years ago at the Software and System Technology Conference. And I refer to that mentor that helped me with estimation. And I'm going back 1973. What he taught me, I still use today. And we factored that into Essence. So that blog will help you if you want to become a better estimator for life in a very simple way, give you 5 things to always be thinking about that you can take with you. That's one. The other one is on modeling. Some people have said that Essence doesn't help a lot with architecture and design. And so I wrote that other blog to explain that it actually does. It helps you if you want to become a better architect and a designer for life. I show how Essence really hits what you need to take with you for life. When people say that Essence won't help with design or architecture, what they really mean is it won't teach you to use the latest hot tool that's out there. It won't teach you how to use, learn to do UML or learn to model with another tool. But those things change, and that's the whole point. We're not teaching you specific programming languages. We're not teaching you tools because they constantly change. We're teaching you here the things you can take with you for life. So that's what you can take away from both of those blogs and the other ones. What is it you can learn, and you won't have to relearn again and again. That's what you're going to gain from those blogs.
Great. Now I'm going to jump down into the weeds a little bit. Does Essence let you know when it is possible or it's time to move from one alpha to another?
Okay, good question. No, and that was intentionally. When we were putting the model together, we did not want to put, I could give you, and I almost do with my Stealth Agile, I could give you steps for how to use the alphas, but that would be a practice. And someone could build a practice on this is one way to use the alphas. But the reason we wanted to not do that is we want to keep this independent of practices. Let people come up with how to move from this alpha to the next one that works for them. Because when I do root cause analysis, I keep the 7 alphas in my head, and depending on what my client tells me or what I hear, I could jump from one to another because it just triggers something. You know, something a stakeholder would say might trigger something in the opportunity. But there isn't one specific, there's no perfect path. There isn't one path. It's whichever works for you. All right. So to answer the question, no, intentionally, we don't want to tell you how to use it. We want you to use it as a thinking framework, using it, look at examples. In fact, I do have examples, and we also have on the CMAT website a user's guide where we give examples of using the alphas in to do a root cause analysis, and that gives you one path through it. But we don't want you to think that's the only path through it, because that's not a good way to think about it. That would start people thinking that they should use Essence as just another practice, another method, and we don't want to do that. And we think that's the wrong path to go down. Okay.
Great. Okay, here's a good question. Is Essence built more on the experience and consensus of CMAT, or do we also have hard data to support it, like case studies and statistics?
Yes, great question. I didn't put all the references here, but I have written other papers myself, a number of them in Crosstalk, and we got volunteers from around the world to come together, and all of them had their own case study. We had people from industry, we had people from academia, and we brainstormed. And so it is really based on what the consensus was that we've learned from over the years from real software projects. So while it's become a standard, and there is we can talk to it as a theory, it's not a theory based on some theoretical idea. It was put together based on what actually works in industry. The checklists came about and were scrutinized because they were things that were important that people agreed should be thought about in order to be successful. I often say this is not a theoretical model. It's a model that helps teams be successful on real software projects. And so that's an important thing to think about. It's a practical, proven model. Do we believe it can work as a theory? Yes, because a good theory, in fact, there's some words that I can't recall who to attribute it to, but Ivar Jacobson often says there's nothing more practical than a good theory, because a good theory is based on what actually works. And so I hope that's kind of gotten to the question. Good.
And actually leads to the next question here, I think. Do you see Essence working in other areas as people apply Agile to learning in other areas? In other words, replace software system with some other form of artifact?
Oh, great. Great question. I referred in this presentation, there was a bullet at the bottom of one of my slides where I just noted that, and it was when I was talking about the problem-solving framework, that it's being generalized to address engineering in general. We are right now moving towards, and this isn't a standard yet, but there's a proposal in front of the OMG to make Essence a standard that is more general for engineering in general. And I wrote a paper co-authored with Bud Lawson and Ivar, and it's in a book that Ivar and Bud published, where we proposed that Essence could easily be generalized to a standard for engineering in general. And one of the simple things you have to do is change the software system alpha to the word system alpha. And when you look at the checklists, you find that it almost just goes to engineering, systems engineering, because most of the checklists, a lot of the people that get excited about this model aren't the software developers that we've been targeting, it's systems engineers, because they can see how it can help there. So the answer is absolutely yes. This can apply to other disciplines as well. And there are people out there that are doing PhD theses. I know many of them. Well, by many of them, I know 3 that are actually working on a thesis for trying to extend Essence for a common ground into other engineering disciplines. So this is right now a very hot topic where people are doing studies because they recognize the value of having a common ground like this for the reasons of solving the problem that I referred to in the start of the talk.
Great. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time today, and I'd like to thank Paul again for his informative presentation and insightful answers to the many questions. Special thanks to each of you for taking the time to attend and participate in today's webinar. This webinar was recorded and will be available online in a few days at http://www.sigsoftresourceswebinar.html. You can find announcements of upcoming ACM SIGSOFT webinars and other ACM activities at learning.acm.org or www.sigsoft.org. I will mention that Ivar Jacobson is going to be giving a series of 3 webinars coming in the fall. On behalf of SIGSOFT, the speakers, and myself, thanks again for joining us, and I hope you will join us again in the future. This concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.